In this video, I'm going to talk about what legal professionals need to know about generative AI. This won't be a super technical video. This is for any lawyer, paralegal, law student, legal professional, or anyone else who's curious about this technology or just simply wants to know what everyone on LinkedIn is talking about all of a sudden. We're going to discuss what generative AI is and what it isn't, what the current AI technologies are and what they do, what the ethical considerations are for using this technology, and finally, ways you can actually make use of it in legal practice today. So with that, let's get started. So what is generative AI really? If you've ever sent an email from a mobile phone, you've used some sort of this technology. You can see here I'm sending an email to someone from my phone. I'm using the Gmail client, and I'm using predictive text suggestions to say whatever it is that I want to say. And it seems to work pretty well for about a sentence or maybe half a sentence. And then I start to get stuck in a weird endless loop of just saying hour and a half hour. Like the algorithms that run on your phone to predict the next word when you're typing out text message or emails, the new generative AI systems are essentially text prediction algorithms. But unlike what you've been using on your phone, these new systems are exponentially more complex and are trained on billions of parameters, meaning the likelihood that one word should follow another. You can see on my screen that I've pulled up Claude, one of the publicly available AI systems, and asked it to complete a story for me. When I hit go, you can see that Claude has done a pretty darn good job of completing the Dark and Stormy Night story for me. Now just a note, Claude runs a little bit slower than what I'm showing here because I've clipped this video so that you don't have to watch it type things out word by word. If you've heard any of the hype out there on the internet, you might think generative AI is something like this, when in reality it's actually something more along the lines of this. Now that we've talked about what generative AI actually is, I want to talk about one thing that it absolutely is not, which is a search engine. To illustrate my point about why ChatGPT and other generative AI tools off the shelf should never be used as a search engine, I've gone over here to ChatGPT. I'm using 3.5, and I have asked it to do some research for me. Specifically, I've told it to summarize a legal case. I've done some prompt engineering telling it that it's a smart and capable associate in a law firm. And then I'm telling it to summarize this case, which is the Florida Bar v. Moses, which has to do with the definition of the practice of law. So let's hit go and see what ChatGPT comes back with. Okay, so it says it doesn't have access to that because its knowledge ends in September 2021. Well, fortunately for us, this case was decided back in 1980, so I'm going to give it the citation and see if it can look it up that way. All right. Oh, good. Okay, so it's got the citation. It seems to be bringing back information about our case. Oh, this looks really good, right? Okay, so we've got an issue. It's doing like a law school summary for us, right? Moses was a non-lawyer, providing legal assistance in legal matters. Main issue in case revolved around determining whether Moses' actions constituted unlicensed practice of law. Okay, well, we know that. Okay, same there. Let's see. So the court ruled in favor of the Florida Bar. Court outlined that certain actions performed by Moses, such as providing legal advice, drafting legal documents, and representing clients in legal proceedings, were functions reserved for licensed attorneys. It's helpful, but it's really generic. So let's ask it, what exactly was Moses doing? That the bar said was unlawful. Well, wait a minute. Now it's saying it doesn't have the citation, or it doesn't have the actual information. Let's give it the citation again, which is okay. Well, wait a minute. So up there, it told me that it did have the information, right? and gave me a summary, but now it's saying it doesn't have it, which is weird. That, I really want to go back and look at what it's got here. I actually know something about this case. Spoiler alert. It involved Edward Moses representing clients in front of the Division of Administrative Hearings, which is an administrative branch of the executive branch of the government in Florida, not drafting legal documents. This is really vanilla, really, really generic stuff based on what I've given it up here. And so what I want to point out is that what ChatGPT is doing is not actually going and getting information and then regurgitating it to us. It's taking the prompts that we've given it, like where I told it it's a case involving the unlicensed practice of law, basically telling us what we want to hear. If you read this really closely, everything in there is very generic. It has to do with the unlicensed practice of law, but it's actually just predictive text. What ChatGPT is doing is thinking, okay, this guy asked me about the unlicensed practice of law in this case. I've got to go create some material about this based on what he's told me and create the stuff in the summary for this case. It actually may or may not know anything about this case, but that doesn't matter. What it's really doing is predicting what text should come after a question about the unlicensed practice of law. Most UPL cases have to do with drafting legal documents, providing legal advice, and representing clients in legal proceedings. Big surprise. So it's going and saying, hey, most of the stuff that I have talking about this, most of the words that have to do with this concept talk about these things. So that's what I'm going to go and get and bring back. It's not actually looking at this case, or we don't know if it is or not. But the material that it's bringing back to us isn't really what we need in terms of legal research, isn't really what we need in terms of the level of detail from actually looking at the case itself. So you cannot assume when you use a tool like this that it's accurately summarizing the case for you, that it's actually going and getting the materials for you, looking at it, and regurgitating information about it. You've probably heard about this case already, but one of the most glaring examples of how ChatGPT and generative AI can be misused in the legal context is the Meta V Avianca case, which is out of the Southern District of New York. Just by way of a quick background, one of the lawyers in this case, Stephen Schwartz, submitted a memorandum to the court that involved a bunch of citations he had gotten from ChatGPT. Unfortunately for this lawyer, none of these citations were actually real cases. ChatGPT had hallucinated them, and when the lawyer asked ChatGPT about them, ChatGPT doubled down and insisted that they were correct. When the opposing attorneys and the federal judge found out about it, you can imagine how not pleased they were, and Stephen Schwartz actually got sanctioned by the court. What I have up here on the screen is Stephen Schwartz's declaration asking the judge not to impose sanctions, and I want to draw your attention to page 3, which I think is really important, and what I think lawyers don't really understand about this technology still, even though it's been in the news. Right here in paragraph 15, Stephen Schwartz makes one of the points that I am trying to make in this video, where he says, at the time I used ChatGPT, I understood that it worked essentially like a highly sophisticated search engine. It's not a search engine. One of the problems with ChatGPT is the natural hype cycle that it's created among legal tech people and people on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Blue Sky or TikTok or whatever, talking about how amazing it is and how game-changing it's going to be for the legal industry. And as I said at the top of this video, I agree that generative AI is a transformative technology, but I also think that it's not quite there yet, especially in its commercial forms. But if you read some of the news articles out there, as well as the PR pieces or listen to the testimony in front of Congress, you'd think that generative AI is the solution to every problem. What Stephen Schwartz did is he read all of this PR and all of these puff pieces and thought, I ought to give ChatGPT a try. It sounds like the next smart tool for tech-savvy litigators to use. And here on paragraph 16, he says, had I understood what ChatGPT is or how it actually worked, I would have never used it to perform legal research. Take Stephen Schwartz's advice here. Don't use ChatGPT for legal research. There are tools out there being developed that apply generative AI to legal research, but the companies that do them are not OpenAI. These tools are not free. Also, these tools are still in development. Use what you use very carefully. Another reason why I think that generative AI should not be used for legal research or like a search engine is not only does it have the tendency to hallucinate, which is still an ongoing problem for every kind of generative AI, it also is really good at sounding correct. It gives all of the indications that the information it's giving you is the right information. And what's more, it will actually double down in some cases on incorrect information and lead you down the garden path when you're looking for things and giving you incorrect information. So what I'm doing here, I'm in Google Bard, which is Google's competitor kind of to ChatGPT, and I'm going to ask it to summarize a case for me. It's the Florida Bar v. Brumbaugh case. It's a case about the unlicensed practice of law. Let's see what Bard comes back with. This is actually right. This is the right citation. 355 Southern 2nd, 1186. Marilyn Brumbaugh was the person's name. She did do-it-yourself divorces and this kind of thing. The Florida Bar filed a petition. Let's see. Later case, Florida Bar v. went for it. Upheld the right of states to regulate the solicitation of legal services. So it's got some really good information here. This all looks right. It's actually pretty right. Bard has gotten pretty good at doing this kind of retrieval that looks right and is mostly correct. But what I want to do now is I want to ask Bard if there's any cases that cite the Brumbaugh case favorably. All right, so here's 3 of them: Florida Bar v. Furman, Florida Bar v. Legal Document Assistance, Florida Bar v. American Legal Solutions. All right, this case involved a company that was providing online legal services. All right, I want to know more about this one, Florida Bar v. American Legal Solutions. Let's look it up in Google Scholar. Let's see what we come back with. Ooh, wait a minute. So hang on, 907 Southern 2nd, 968. That actually isn't pulling up the case that they were talking about. So maybe it just got this citation wrong. Let's copy the name. Okay, so Florida Bar v. American Legal and Business Forms, right? But this is from 1973. This says this case is from 2005. And it's not the same name there, and not the same citation, obviously, because this is 73 and this is 2005, but it's still a Florida Supreme Court case. Okay, so this case involved a company that was providing online legal services to the public. Let's pretend for a minute that I took Google Bard on its face, and I said, wow, that sounds like a case I need to know more about, right? Florida Bar v. American Legal Solutions. Maybe I'm a lawyer representing one of these companies that provides online legal services, and I am thinking, holy cow, I need to know about this case because it's 2005, it's Florida Supreme Court. This citation looks correct. It has the correct formatting. This is the right way for citations to appear. If they're from Florida, this is the right way to show it's from the Florida Supreme Court in the year. So I'm going to ask it to tell me more about this case. See what it comes back with, because this is a case I need to know more about if I'm representing this company. Okay. It's a case in which the Supreme Court of Florida held that a company was providing online legal services. It offered a variety of online legal services, including divorce kits, will kits, bankruptcy kits, ALS. It even has an acronym. So it's an important precedent in the unauthorized practice of law. If I was representing a company that did something similar to what American Legal Solutions is said to be doing, I need to find out more about this case, right? This is a case that I'd want to cite in a motion to the court. This is a case that I'd want to brief the court about. But the problem is, and my point is, that this case doesn't exist. What BARD is doing is it's hallucinating this case. And even when I ask it to tell me more about this case, it's completely generating what it thinks I want to see when I ask it to tell me more about this case. Generative AI systems are not research tools. They are generative tools. They create text based on predictions about what text should come next. When you see stuff like this, it will look correct because they are really, really, really good at sounding right. And that's what you need to take away from this, is that generative AI tools are so good at faking it. Another thing that generative AI tools are not is infallibly consistent. In other words, they aren't calculators. They won't give you the same result across systems and even in the same system at different times. To illustrate my point, I've asked the 4 main publicly available models to tell me the Supreme Court's holding in Brown v. Board of Education. You can see that while they're all pretty correct about telling me what happened, they're all also different in how they tell me what happened and what the information is that they're reporting to me. Some of them, like BARD here, gives me a very high level of detail in its response, while some are just more cursory. While this is a difference between models and how they generate responses, you can also get different responses to the same question within the same model. Here on BARD, if I click on View Other Drafts, I can see 3 different versions of a response that the system generated to my prompt. So this is something that you must keep in mind if and when you're using these tools. You can't assume that you're going to get the exact same result every time you ask it to do something. These are generative systems, which means each time they're generating text, that text will be different. Now I'd like to talk about some of the different generative AI tools out there that you can use right now and how they work. I've already shown you a little bit about ChatGPT, Claude, and BARD, but there's a 4th one called Llama 2, and this side of it lets me show you some of the inner workings of how these systems do their stuff. On my screen, you can see the prompt, which is what the user is asking the system to do. You can also see the system prompt down here. This is like a built-in instruction for how the AI is supposed to do the job. You can see the maximum and minimum number of new tokens. This functions kind of like a word limit, telling the AI system how many words it needs to generate to do a response. And then down here you can see the temperature. You can think of this kind of like a bullshitometer, for lack of a better term. The higher the number here, the more likely the system is to be random, i.e. make things up. Behind the scenes, each of the generative AI tools have a similar set of settings. Some let you turn the knobs on them, like OpenAI if you sign up for a paid account and go to the playground, while some don't. Both BARD and Claude are pretty well set in how they work and won't let you adjust the inner workings, whereas OpenAI, if you sign up for a paid account, will let you choose the model that you want to use as well as the temperature if you go to the developer playground. One of the massive ethics considerations in attorneys and legal professionals using these tools is whether or not what you put into these systems is actually remaining confidential. Now, this isn't a problem if you're asking ChatGPT to hallucinate cases for you, but it becomes a huge problem if you're asking it to summarize your client's medical records or to analyze some sort of confidential information. On my screen, I've pulled up OpenAI's ChatGPT FAQs, and they are very clear about saying that what you put into ChatGPT will be used for quality assurance and for future training. Likewise, here with Claude's terms of use, Anthropic is very clear about saying that anything you put into or upload to Claude could even be reproduced in the outputs. This means that if you upload a confidential memo, phrases from it could show up down the road when it's responding to a different user entirely. So far in this video, I've mostly been talking about all of the problems and pitfalls that can come up if you're using generative AI in really wrong ways. But now I want to switch gears and talk about several of the ways that generative AI can actually be extremely useful for legal professionals if done in the right way. All of these things have to do with what the AI systems are actually good at, which is generating text from a set of inputs. There are three areas in which I think generative AI can be super useful for legal professionals, and I'll talk about them one by one. The first is called Retrieval Augmented Generation, or RAG, used for summarization or chats. This is essentially feeding an AI system a set of documents or inputs, and then limiting it to those documents or inputs when it answers questions or creates summaries. The second area is first draft creation for certain things like client letters or emails. The emphasis here needs to be on the word first. These are first drafts. They need to be reviewed. They must be reviewed before you do anything with them. So keep that in mind. And the third area is just rewording and wordsmithing. The first thing I want to talk about is RAG summarization. RAG, remember, stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. And again, that's a fancy way of saying that you're just feeding an AI model a specific piece of information and then limiting its answers to what it can find in that text. One big caveat here, while this kind of system is designed to cut down on hallucinations, there's no guarantee that hallucinations won't happen. They're just far less likely. Also, everything I said earlier about confidentiality and privileged information is true here. Do not think that just because you're using a commercial RAG system, Retrieval Augmented Generation, that it maintains the level of confidentiality that you need and you can feed it protected information. To demonstrate how a RAG or Retrieval Augmented Generation system works, I've gone here to Claude, which lets you upload PDF files, and I'm going to upload a recent Florida Supreme Court case to it. And you can see now that I've uploaded this case, Claude has given me actually quite a nice summary of what happened in this case, some of the highlights here, and it actually gets the case right and how the Florida Supreme Court decided. So now that I'm inside this chat, I can ask Claude questions about what happened in this case. Let's ask it about the dissenting opinion. And you can see that Claude actually summarized the dissent quite well and hit the highlights there too. I'm going to ask Claude what the major cases were that the court cited. Of course, I put a typo in cases, but that typically doesn't trip up these systems. And you can see here Claude pulled some of the main cases, and these are cases that actually exist because Claude is looking at the Florida Supreme Court when it's answering my question, and so it's pulling the cases from there. Honestly, most of the models these days are quite good at RAG, or Retrieval Augmented Generation. It's kind of like having a free intern who can do the rote work of analysis and summarization for you and pull out the highlights from the text of cases or depositions or things like that. What I'm showing you is a publicly available version of this kind of technology. There are highly sophisticated custom-built solutions out there, and some of them are making their way into the legal industry. Be ready to look for this in legal research, Retrieval Augmented Generation. It's actually very, very useful. If you want to try this out, I recommend only doing it with things that aren't confidential. If you're involved in litigation and want to use it with summary judgment motions that opposing counsel filed, or things that are public record, that's a really great way to do this. Again, please do not upload confidential information to one of these systems because they will ingest it and use it in their training data. Another area where these systems excel is in creating first drafts of things. Give a model enough information as well as some good prompt engineering juice, and you can typically get a workable first draft for things like letters, statement of facts, blog post, or really whatever you want. This plays to the strengths of generative AI systems because you're asking it to come up with new text for you. Please keep in mind that first draft means first draft. Just like handing an assignment off to an unpaid intern, you shouldn't expect to take what the system gives you and file it with the court or publish it or send it without reading it and making edits and revisions. And if you're doing this, please don't feed it confidential information. You can see on my screen I've asked ChatGPT to write a letter for me, and I'm the lawyer, to opposing counsel saying that we will agree to mediation, and it's come up with something that's kind of serviceable. I'll probably need to edit, and by probably I mean I will need to edit it, but it's something that I can get started with, and it's very usable for situations like this. Another area where generative AI really shines is in rewording and wordsmithing text that has already been written. If you're like 99.99% of humanity, you might have trouble rereading and rewriting your own work. It can be a true pain. Generative AI, however, is honestly pretty good at acting like a turbocharged thesaurus. You can see that I've taken our Dark and Stormy Night story from earlier in the video, and I'm going to run it through Bard and ask it to make it sound smarter. Bard took the text that I gave it and added some really complicated words to it. On a tempestuous night, John returned home from a protracted workday. And you can see this is kind of sophomoric, really, but it really is good at taking text and rewriting it into a way that you want. And down here at the bottom, you can even see Bard explains its work and some of the changes that it made and how it did things. So if you're writing something and want another pair of eyes on it or another take on what you're writing, generative AI can be a really, really handy free tool to use for stuff like that.